Hello, I'm Benoit Ladouceur. I'm a risk management director. Been doing risk management for a few years. Thank you for being here today for this event, and especially thanks for Alex Sidorenko for once again organizing the event. Alex has been a staunch supporter of proper risk management for years now through his video and his social media postings. Once again, he lined up a pretty amazing group of presenters to talk about where risk management as a discipline is going in the future. So that's always interesting to be part of this. My proposal today is not earth-shattering, but rather to give a downright practical intermediate level presentation about risk management and modeling. It may get a little bit silly for people that know me, but I assure you that the methodology can be applied to just about any business problem. Also, please note that I need to put out a disclaimer. Don't want to be kidnapped by MI6 or anything. So this is only for fun, the topic of the day, which starts with the problem from the client, which is basically we have a bunch of clients and said clients have been having some issues in the past achieving their business goals. Most of them did not end well, and that's mostly due to two things. First, of course, there's the double O's agent, which are preventing them from reaching their success. And also, I guess, seeing from what I see, they had a pretty bad consultant working for them in the past. That consultant has likely enforced the use of risk matrix and other bad methodologies in the past. So the goal of today is how can we improve on what was done before risk management wise for the supervillain from the James Bond movie. Please remember that Amazon, MGM, and Eon Production are the owners of all right of the characters, including the pictures I'm showing today. I'm just trying to figure out how can we finally kill James Bond. So we have all those clients which are committed to evil excellence in order to make a profit, to dominate the world, or to get revenge, basically. So as a consultant, I smell a fresh opportunity to try to help them better manage their risk. And one of the things with working with supervillains, I assume, is they don't stand for bad methodologies that are yielding useless results. And this is back to the age-old question of what's the impact of a red risk on your plan? What does red mean? What does yellow mean? What does green mean? They have so I don't want to redo the whole argument against risk matrix here. That's been done in the past. It's probably going to be done by other presenters during Risk Awareness Week 2021. But if you're bringing just a heat map to your super villain, he'll probably throw you to crocodile because that's fairly useless business advice. A few years back, Alex had provided a maturity chart or like a path to maturity for risk management, and I always loved it. So basically, here it is. The idea is his, not mine. But when you're doing risk management, you're starting with the heat map, which is the lowest form of risk management. Then you can move to things like risk register, which are not that good either. There's some cases where risk register can be useful. I'm going to give you an example. If you're working in process safety, a HAZOP is a kind of risk register. It's just super structured from all the subsystem and the components of those systems with all the potential failure modes. So it's kind of a very, very large risk register. I remember doing one fairly big HAZOP for all the operation from a isolated mining site, everything that had to do with explosives. So from the shipping, putting on the boat, shipping, the unloading the boat, how you bring it to the depot. So all the steps, all the explosive and the accessories with all the failure modes, it was a fairly big endeavor, but it's very thorough. So risk register in some cases can be good, but it's very limited. Then you get objective-centric ERM and qualitative bow ties, which are going nearer to good or practices. So those are step forward. Then you've got quantitative risk assessments, monte-carlo simulation, or layer of protection analysis with all the mathematics backing it. And eventually machine learning, AI, will see where the discipline goes. So this is just a way to see how things are progressing over time in this space. So back to our client, because you can't forget the need of your client when he's got the volcano lair, basically. So the thorn in our client's side is basically James Bond, who had 130 unsuccessful attempts on his life. So it means he's kind of hard to kill. Some people have been very creative in the way they try to kill James Bond. He's responsible for a lot of minions' death. So basically, James Bond is about 16 kills per mission. There's a small creep as time moves forward. Pierce Brosnan apparently was the most lethal James Bond of all time. So that's 352 kills between Dr. No and Quantum of Solace. So it keeps, it's something that's sort of significant. You need to replace those henchmen. You want to be giving good wages to your henchmen. You don't want them turning against you. So maybe there's debt benefits involved. So that's a lot of money going that way. And then you've got the average property damage per mission. That's more than $500 million on average. We're going to take a deeper look at that. So he's, notwithstanding the fact that James Bond is blocking the objectives from my client, he is also killing staff and he is also causing a lot of property damage, which is quite the menace, and we should take care of that. Yet, with all of this, James Bond's probably not immortal. When you take a look at that, Agent 00, 33, 004, 009 were all killed. 006 was Sean Ben's villain in GoldenEye, so he's kind of he's not around anymore, but still still the same training, we assume. So that's that. It's possible to kill a 00 agent. It just looks like James Bond is harder to kill than most. So just for the to review cost of 007, basically I took took that out of the web. It's basically the list of moving by actors, how much damage on average per movie. There's a huge outlier with Moonraker where they blow up the space station and I think 3 or 4 space shuttles. So that this is a lot of money that went up in flame rather quickly. And for the model, I'm assuming that 60 to 80% of the damage is done to villain's asset because James Bond is also destroying public property. He's nearly a criminal when you take a look at that. But and now I've got a few James Bond fans that are just raging after me and have probably either quit or are planning their revenge. So hopefully I don't get sued over this. But our assumption 60 to 80% of damage is done on the villain's asset. Then there's kills. So this is basically by movie the number of kills by Bond and other kills. So it shows, like I was saying, Pierce Brosnan here is fairly lethal compared to other James Bond, Roger Moore. You see a movie with very few kills in some cases. So this is something that we're taking once again for the number of henchmen to replace. Because if you don't invest well in your henchmen, they won't have the quality you need to be able to do your job. So let's get back a little bit more serious on Bayes' theorem and the Bayesian approach. This is something that's quite key in risk management, and we don't talk about it enough, I think. And it's not something that's instinctively easy to pick up. I know for me, it took me a while to get around it. I'm not the brightest guy around, but it's worth diving in and making sure we understand Bayes' theorem. So first, we have the Reverend Bayes, who developed the whole reasoning behind it. He was very intuitive about it. He was using geometry a little more, and but the person who did most of the heavy lifting and started putting algebra at the back and the mathematics at the back is Pierre-Simon de Laplace, a French mathematician. So he rediscovered it independently and he built on it because Bayes did not publish it. He worked on it, but he did not publish it. So we can say basically that Pierre-Simon de Laplace did the heavy lifting on this specific theorem. So Bayes' theorem is being used to break German cipher codes in World War II, to locate submarines as well. It's something that we're still using today to filter spam from your inbox, which is fairly amazing when you take a look at my Hotmail account, how many spams there are around and how they're getting better and better at isolating them. So that's an application of Bayes' theorem. You can build even more complex analysis tool when you're working with the Bayes' theorem. So you've got Bayesian networks, which are fairly powerful. There's in the Society for Risk Analysis, there's always a couple of interesting articles about the application of Bayesian network, because you pass from conditional probability from node to node. So that's something that's fairly strong. So today, Bayes' theorem is well liked. It was not always the case. It was seen as the worst part of statistics for a while, which was probably statistics were probably seen for a while as well as the worst part of mathematics. So it was nearly banned. It had to fight for its existence, and yet there's so many applications. It's just people did not like the fact that you could use some subjective information. So often that's what we call the prior. We're going to see that later on. But people were seeing this as unscientific. I'm saying, well, how can you come up with conjure up numbers and then adapt them over time? So we'll talk about that later. Just so we are on the clear, data in general is observe, measure, is something that you can see, that you can evaluate, measure. So an example of data would be the number of cars on the road. Information, it's data that you've processed. So that would be maybe the number of car on the road per hour. And maybe you put it on the table, or you do a graph with it. So data, number of car. Information is processed data, so number of car per hour on the road. Knowledge is known from gather information, so something that emerged from gather information. So maybe the road is busy between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning and 16 o'clock and 18 o'clock at night. With delays of up to 30 minutes for your commute. So that would be knowledge. It's something that you organize the data, and then you process it, and then you evaluate, well, this is what I gained from it. And inference is the conclusion you take based on that knowledge. I know I should leave 15 minutes early, for example, if I'm leaving at 6:45 or something like that. So Bayesian approach is a great way to infer new knowledge and to do inference based on data when you have a little more information, new evidence emerging, for example. It's also a very important theorem to understand cause and effects. Basically, thinking in terms of Bayesian inference will help you pass from the one level, that's it, from data to knowledge and then to inference. So that's the interesting bit with Bayes' theorem. And basically, how it can be applied for risk management, it's quite simple. Is you start with the previous data you had, and sometimes you have none. So you need to conjure up a prior by just having a discussion. So you take what you have, then you add new evidence that you're receiving, and then you adjust your belief. So what does that have to do with risk management? Well, basically, with risk management, we're always dealing with uncertainty. We're always dealing with, we don't have all the data we need. And Bayes, what he was saying is basically probability is orderly opinion. Inference from data is nothing other than the revision of such opinion in the light of relevant new information. So it can be a way to reduce your risk in your model as you get more information over time. Your model, you refine it basically. So let's take this and apply it to a very simple problem. Intuitive Bayesian inference is something that we do on a daily basis. Let's say I'm having a deeply significant disagreement with a gentleman in a pub, which may go downhill. Not that I frequent pub picking up fight, but let's take that common example. So I know myself for my previous data. I know I've done some training in martial arts in the past with the military, so I've got some experience, but that was a while back. I'm a better shape than the average man in his 40s, but that does not mean that much. So maybe I'm giving myself an edge overall on an average confrontation. Maybe I should come up on top if there's a physical confrontation. So now I'm going to put my new evidence in. So maybe, is the person more muscular? Is someone drunk? Is the person wearing calloused hands with cauliflower ears and a mixed martial art gym t-shirt or a dojo t-shirt or something like that? I'm going to take all those elements and basically if I'm facing a guy like this, for example, well, maybe I'll consider that I have very little chance of winning. So what I've done is I took my previous data and I've upgraded it using all those similar information. And then I'm going to say, well, can I come up on top or not, basically. So that's the intuitive way of doing Bayesian risk or updating your likelihood based on that new data. There's obviously a more mathematical way to take a look at it, and we're going to get back to the formula a little later on. But this is basically the probability that A will happen considering that B happens. So we're going to see example. We're going to break them down later on, but basically, that whole process means that if I've got just a little bit of data as previous data, I won't need much to be able to change my belief, my conclusion. If I already got a lot of data, I'm going to need much more evidence to change my belief. It's something that's quite intuitive when you take a look at it. For example, people often use the sun as an example. So basically, fairly sure that in a few hours the sun will rise. My personal experience is the sun will rise every day. But if it was the first day of the Earth, you wouldn't have as much evidence that the sun will rise on the following day. So it means that depending on how much data you already have, well, it's going to take you more or less in order to change your opinion about something. If we keep going, scenarios, basically, we need to options are always good, and we need to figure out how we get rid of James Bond. So here's what we're going to do to James Bond. We're going to try to shoot him. It's conventional. It's boring. It's bland. I won't call it pedestrian, but that's the basics. Or we can try to capture 007 and execute him with a Doom machine, something exotic, something complicated, something flashy. To catch him, maybe we'll need some help, and maybe we're going to pick our good friends from Mission Impossible to catch James Bond. Maybe they could manage to capture him. That would probably create the biggest movie franchise of all time, at least until the next Avenger movie's in. But that could be an option for us to try to get James Bond. So let's talk about shooting him. And for that, we're going to use a beta distribution. Last year, I talked when I was showing how to plan a heist, because yes, 2020, I showed how to plan a heist using a Monte-Carlo simulation. Well, I've already covered that basically a beta distribution is a distribution of distribution for things that are hit or miss, pun intended. This is for random process. So basically, a random process where you have hit or miss is a binomial distribution. So that could be head or tail on a coin, for example. And the beta distribution is very useful when you don't have a lot of information and you want to see what is the range that my binomial distribution can have. So is it 60%, between 60 and 80% chance of having a head on a rigged coin, for example. So basically, what you take is, I'm going to start, this is my prior probability. This is what I had before. So over 600 cases, in this case, I had 5 fatalities of 00 agents and 595 non-fatalities following being shot by the 00 agent. So basically, this is those are the two parameters I'm putting in my beta beta distribution. Here at the back in my Excel software, you would have a distribution. So this is just the expected value here, but there's actually a distribution at the back. I'm going to show it to you. So basically here I have for prior probability, you see that the expected, the mean is 0.83%. So it leads about somewhere about here's the mean. And so this is the value that based on the few cases I have. So you see that the spread is quite narrow, basically. I'm lucky because I already had a lot of information. If I only had 2 fatalities and let's say 200 non-fatalities, it'd be a much broader range. But now this is relatively narrow because 600 is not a bad number in this case to start having a good idea of the distribution. It's enough data. Then you take new information. So I'm going to take new information. This is basically I'm adding James Bond in the mix. James Bond was shot at apparently around 4,662 times. The bullet did not kill him, obviously. And I've added 2 other agents. Would that mean, let's say I did kill 3 people on here? This will narrow even more my distribution because I'm putting in a lot of information. And the great thing with beta distribution is you can just add them up and they become the new parameters for your new distribution. So that's something that's quite interesting because you can have a system that every time that you have a success or failure, a 1 or a 0, it's getting a little bit more precise. Because you don't need to be adding up big blocks. Let's say that I'm having another agent getting shot 1 time. I could just add in my combined distribution, I could just add 1 here. And this distribution here would be adjusted. That's the beauty of it. I've used that for inspections for rolling stock, for example. When you have inspection and you're looking for a specific condition, well, you can gradually, as you gain more information, you refine your model. And how it looks like in practice is when you combine everything. The next picture I'm going to show you is everything together. So basically, here we have the initial distribution with the prior probability. So it was still rather broad compared to the other one. The second distribution I'm putting is the new information with James Bond and those other agents. So that's a lot more data I've put in. And this is the combined distribution. It shifted to the left because I've introduced someone that resisted a lot of shootings. So this is quite important. I've adjusted my new distribution. So that would be a cell in your Monte Carlo simulation. And you get a clearer picture as times evolve of what's the actual spread of the probability for the binomial distribution. So you to get more practical, because you might not be trying to kill James Bond, you can replace kill 00 agents by positive and negative product review, for example, if you don't have to worry about a time trend, salesman making a sale or not, having a faulty item leaving a line of production. Do you have a fraud or it's not a fraud? So you can apply this on just about any business problem where the outcome is 1 or 0. Now for Bayesian statistics, so was a simple updating, Bayesian updating. You see, it's not necessarily complicated. So, but this was a simple example. Now, NASA is a very serious organization about risk management, and they have some fantastic open access quantitative risk management literature that you can just download from the net, including Bayesian Inference for NASA probabilistic risk and reliability analysis. It's a very interesting document that shows you in depth how you can use different failure types. So is it something that's operating at all time, or is that a system that's on standby and it's only when you trigger it that you're going to need that to see if it works or not? Then does it fail on demand or to operate and standby or on demand? And then depending on the type of distribution you have and the type of prior you have, you get the instruction on how to integrate them, basically. We won't go into the depth of this today, but binomial distribution are for failure on demand. Once again, it's on or off. A Poisson distribution is for failure in time, so how many times this is likely to fail over time. Exponential distribution can be used for random durations for when it's going to fail, specifically in time. And since you're doing this with Monte Carlo simulation, all the integration is done for you, so you don't need calculus actually to be able to apply those methods, which is a bonus for people that are a little rusty on calculus. And for priors, basically a conjugate is you got all the information you have, the old and the new information is in the same distribution. Non-informative prior is you have no information whatsoever. So you might there's some mathematical tool you can use, or you can just say it's a 50-50 chance or 60-40% chance as my initial prior and my prior. And non-conjugate is basically when you have information on your prior, but it's not the same distribution than what you're trying to achieve, what you're adding the new data to. So basically, this is a good book to take a look at. And to learn and improve your modeling practice through it. Once again, this is for reliability a lot, but reliability can be used for cybersecurity. It's not only pumps and valves, right? It can be used for different applications. So for all those analysis, I saw 2 slides ago, you saw how you can do using beta distribution for will James Bond die of being shot or not. There's multiple ways to do those analysis. There's multiple tools depending on your preferences. So me, for this demo, I've been mostly using a spreadsheet-based tool. So you get good tools like Model Risk, Palisade at Risk. So you pick your tool and you integrate directly the uncertainty within the Excel model. So that's good for business. It's quite simple or clear to do and to explain to people. Cost is there. Replicability can be an issue with if not everyone's got license, but at least that's a good way of taking a look at it. Analytica is another great tool, which is graph-based. So it's the same thing here. Basically, you get your distribution out by building your model, and this is an ugly model, but it was just for demonstration. But you structure the various variables and your distribution, and you do your arithmetics on it, and it's a good way of tackling this. It's a great tool. I do believe there's still a free option for Analytica if you want to take a look at it and test it and play with it a little more. And then you can do everything in coding in R or in Python. So basically, here's in R how you would get the same results, and that's free again. It's uglier, but then you get other possibilities when you're coding things yourself. So multiple ways to do that type of analysis. Now, back to our James Bond with the shooting and everything. Modeling still requires common sense. If a result, you're not sure about a result, you should challenge it and take a look at it. For example, this 007 was obviously never killed by a bullet yet. Uh, he was exposed to a lot more bullets than other 00s, so maybe he's way better than the others, or maybe he's way luckier. We won't know for sure, but I can pose an hypothesis saying that maybe James Bond is harder to kill, and I wanted to test it. So in R, I just run a quick Fisher exact test to see it's parametric, and it's just to take a quick look at, well, is James Bond really immortal, or is he really that much hard to kill with bullets? So, and here, when you take a look at the p-value, it's very, 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 very low. So it looks like there's a fair chance that James Bond is tougher than the other 00s. So just something to keep in mind. Maybe bullet won't be the best option. And yes, for people who are nerds about statistics, I just use both frequencies and Bayesian stats in the same presentation. It's like dividing by 0. So probably I'm going to get thunderstruck or something. So hopefully after the end of this recording. So let's go with a machine instead. Let's take a look at the machine option. So I'll be quick. I want to decrease my risk of failure and increase the risk for 007. So typically in process safety, we try to reduce the risk, but now I want to increase the risk for James Bond. So we're a villain, we're working for a villain. The name of the game is to be gruesome. We want to be intimidating as well, so I'm using hydrofluoric acid, which is very nasty stuff. For James Bond, he's 76 kilograms, so around 60.5 grams is supposed to hit the lethal dose 50, the LD50, so 50% chance of killing James Bond with 60.5 grams, so should refer to a toxicologist for that. But my assumption is if I put a few tens of liters on him, being a couple of order of magnitude higher than the lethal dose, it wouldn't make for a suitable death. So basically, I've got two systems here with the reservoir, a valve because you didn't do some maintenance. This is a pump because we want to make sure it sprays. This is a remote control valve, and you got the nozzle here. So I've got two systems that are the same. If we were doing a very thorough process safety risk assessment, we'd be breaking down all those components by failure mode, evaluating the likelihood of each of them failing. So we'd be listing things like reservoir leak, manual valves kept closed by human error. We'd put maybe signal not reaching the relay, valve not operating, clogged pipe, burst pipe, failure of the electrical system. We'd take a look at all those failure modes and their likelihood and their cause, and we'd be digging very deep. Now we'll keep this high level. Let's say that we got 10% chance of failure of each system. So pump one, the whole system here, 10% failure, that one, 10% failure, because HF is really, the hydrofluoric acid is really nasty. It destroys metals, for example. So, it's hard on systems. So maybe 10% chance failure for each. Then we need to ask ourselves about correlation. What causes are correlated that would make both pumps fail at the same time? Because that's a possibility. Because yes, if pump one fail, pump two will not necessarily fail. But if they're fed by the same electricity, they may fail at the same time. So just something to keep in mind. You need to take a look if some of your failure mode are correlated. And once again, that would apply for cybersecurity as well. I mean, a user error, someone who's doing something bad, or can bypass quite a few of your safety measures at the same time. So you need to take a look at that. Same thing, this could be, if we reverse that problem, we could apply this to a potential failure of your plant, so you're not producing your chemicals or your widgets. So that type of methodology is not only for process safety, it's broader than that. Then I'm going to improve the system, saying, well, maybe electricity is a common failure mode for both my pump system. So maybe I'm putting here a gravity system with, once again, a maintenance valve. And here I've got a chain operating valve. So maybe it's someone, a minion that will pull on the yank on that chain and let the hydrofluoric acid just fall through. So I'm reducing failure modes because I don't have a pump. It's a simpler mechanical system. But then I've got two potential human errors, which would be someone leaves the valve here, the maintenance valve, closed while I want it open, and the minion is not pulling the chain, or for any reason, maybe someone that got seduced by James Bond or something like that. So this is another different failure mode, but I'm diversifying in this case, and I'm reducing my risk and increasing the risk to James bound. So let's put 5% likelihood failure for that system. And since we rely on the henchman, once again, we need to give good condition to our henchmen if you want him to be loyal as they can be. Next step I'm going to add is maybe lasers. We need lasers, I think. They make everything better. Even if industrial lasers, they're more about cooking someone than slicing him. It's not like in the movie, but they can cut flesh. It's a slow process. So ethicists can debate if a supervillain should offer slow death or quick death. So to avoid failure on demand, and because this is a silly example, let's say that we have the laser beams fire on a continuous basis. So they're always there. No matter if there's a James Bond in or not, the lasers are firing. So let's put that, because that's going to enable us to use another distribution and not just only a binomial or beta distribution. So our lasers are working all the time. And I want to, let's say I know I'm going to get James Bond in a week. So 168 hours. I need those lasers to operate for 168 hours before they fail to make sure that we slice James Bond when he gets there, because that's another layer of redundancy and resilience on my system. So here comes gamma distribution. The gamma distribution will give you the time it takes to hit the threshold of events. It's linked to a Poisson distribution, which we talked about last year for, I think it was for the patrols of security guard where we're doing our heist. So gamma distribution are not always used in reliability, but they're easy to update as more information gets in. We need to make sure, though, that when you're playing with gamma distribution, you don't have an increased decay over time or an acceleration of the failure mode. If not, there's better choices. So let's say for one pump, this here would cover one of the, or in this case, our lasers. That would cover our laser system. Let's say here is I've got prior information that was observed by another supervillain who say he operated the system for 800 hours and he had 2 failures. So mean time between failures, 400 hours. And at the back of this, once again, when I open up the software, you have the distribution of this. So I'm going to come to it in a second. Now I've tested my site, and so far I've got 2,000 hours of operation with only 1 failure. So I'm better already. I'm much better my system. So is it because I was lucky or not? I can't tell for sure. But once again, I can combine the data and taking the prior and adding the new information to combine the data. So once again, it's just my parameters. I still got a target of 1 failure. I'm going to have on total 3 failure over 2,800 hours of operations. And this is the time between failure, which is my other parameter I need. And at the back, I've got the distribution. And once again, I'm going to show you here is in red my initial data. So it was failing much faster. The longer that distribution is, the longer it takes for the failure to happen. Then I've added the new data, but I don't, and then I combine them basically. So it shows the final distribution. I'm going to come to my final distribution. So here I could adjust here. If I needed 2 weeks of operating time, I could change the number here in the Monte Carlo model, and that would shift the line to somewhere here. For example, if I want to know what's the likelihood of it operating still after 2,000 hours, and I'd see here, so for 168 hours, I've got 16.5% chance that my laser will survive that long. And the beautiful thing with all of this is you can just build the same thing in Excel. Using gamma distribution function, you don't need to pay the $4,000 for the software. You could just use Excel. You won't have the nice graph in the same way, but for one value, you can put here is the 168 hours of operation I need before I hit one specific incident or the top of my laser system. And then I've got here what's the mean time between failure, and true is for cumulative. So you can just use Excel to do the same thing. Let's get back to be serious for a moment here. Gamma distribution will give you the likelihood that your system will still work in a given time based on past history. We could use this for less interesting applications than killing James Bond. So, for example, how long should a car dealership remains open to sell X amount of car? How long will it take me to have 4 fraud cases in my company? How fast will people pass at a cash register when you're in the supermarket? You can use this for meteorology as well, for if water will fall from the sky. So those are all applications of the gamma distribution, which can be quite useful. But let's get back to our trap, because traps are fun. Scorpion shoot. Basically, I'm adding scorpions. Let's say that I've got 25% likelihood of dying because of James Bond dying because of scorpions. It would be another binomial distribution problem that we already see. We won't cover it again. At this point, scorpions are more about branding and generating fear than real effectiveness, I think. I don't like injuring animals, but sometimes as a good consultant, you need to adapt to your client, and scorpions could be helpful. Even though James Bond was already exposed to scorpion venom, so maybe he's developed a tolerance. So maybe 25% chance of dying because of the scorpion exposure. It's just a little additional extra layer. Now it's we're gonna get to model time. Here I have the model, which is the fairly traditional Monte Carlo simulation model. I'll evaluate the risk-adjusted cost of my two options, and I'm going to take also a look at the likelihood of success, especially for the machine. So I've broken it down in some sections: cost of the bullet option, cost of the machine option, cost-benefit analysis for the machine option if you're doing it solo or if you're doing a joint venture, and also will the trap even work. It's a simple model. The goal is just to show you some of the possibilities. It's modeled in Excel using at risk as the interface to make sure that we have that Monte Carlo simulation running. Once again, you could basically build that in many different types of solution depending on what's available to you and what are your preferences. So let's dive in with the cost of the bullet option to kill James Bond. So in this case, we already know it's probably not the best option. It's been tried many times. We saw that from the Bayesian updating we did earlier on the binomial distribution for this. But first is how much money does it cost? So I went with the cost of bullets. I could have went with a specific value for bullet, but not all bullets cost the same. So this is why this is being simulated through a binomial distribution. Here is just to give me the count of 75,000 iteration taken out of the triangular distribution. So basically I've got a minimal value of 25 cents, most likely value of 40 cents, and highest value of $3.3. So it's just to reflect the actual cost of bullet from different calibers, because your henchman, you don't know which type of bullet they'll be shooting at James Bond. Then we're a good organization. We try to promote that benefits for a henchman. I think it's not done enough in this industry. So what we have here is the cost of the henchman firing the actual bullet. So it might be a mix of salary and the benefits. So at the minimum, it's $100,000. At the maximum, it's $5 million, and it's a most likely value of 1 million. And we have this basically to make sure that we got the spread. Not all henchmen are equal. Not all henchmen will necessarily die in the attempt, although we know that there's that likelihood definitely of that happening. So when I'm doing this and adding the cost of bullets, basically I've got the total cost of the bullet option. I've already ran the simulation to save time. So here's the variability of the that option, the cost variability. So it's still fairly pricey, but if I take a look at where that variation comes from, it's really from the cost of henchmen, not the cost of bullets. So bullets are cheaper than henchmen when you're paying those benefits, but like I say, you want to have a good reputation on the supervillain job market. Now to the cost of the machine option. So basically, I've done another rather simple distribution, which is the risk log normal distribution. It's really useful for projects because it gives you a tail end. Here the parameters are a little bit different. So what I've done is for the cost of the machine, I don't know much about that machine, so this is a very high level estimate, but I've done I've got 5% in the percentile 5. So that's one case out of 20. My machine would cost me $11 million. The median, so or the most likely in the type of distribution, would be 12.5 million, and 95% the percentile. So basically, one chance out of 20, the worst case would be $17.5 million. So that's the cost of the actual machine. Then cost of catching James Bond. We've already discussed that we'd be using probably Mission Impossible team to do it. So here's the cost. Same type of distribution, because there's the advantage of a risk norm log normal distribution is it will not be bound on the right. So you can have very high values with a smaller likelihood of happening. So it's a thinner, usually a thinner tail than what we find in a triangular distribution. So that's one of the advantage. And also sometimes people are unimaginative on how much things can go badly. So that distribution will capture that, as opposed to a triangular distribution where people, you put a hard cap on your distribution because you have a set limit which you won't go further out. So that's basically why I took that specific distribution here. And using the alt one means that it's easier for people around the table to have the discussion to figure out where would that those value get in, compared to trying to talk about the parameter of the distribution itself in terms of Greek letters. Next step is the cost benefit analysis for the machine option. So it's a very, very, very simple NPV model. Here's discount rate. Here are the cash flow on line 23. So let's break it down. For year one, this is where you do your investment. So in this case, we were taking that up from the cost of the machine function here. Then every year, this is the potential financial impact if James Bond is hitting my organization. So this is based on what we calculated based on what we get from the movies. Obviously, we still have that big outlier here, Moonraker. So that's why I've pushed the value of the percentile of the risk log normal out higher to have less of those events in that range. There's multiple ways you could have done the parameters for that distribution. You could have went for a distribution fit, for example. You add your human expert opinion in there, but I wanted to do it fast for this demo. So here's the impact should James Bond hit my organization. And now we need to ask, what's the likelihood of James Bond hitting the organization? And we have this through a risk uniform distribution. I'm saying I've got basically between 5 and 20% every year chance that James Bond will hit my organization. And we also know that James Bond is not creating that much mayhem per year. So there's 22 movies over 46 years. So that will adjust my likelihood of getting hit for a specific year. And then when you run the when you run it, you get the NPV out. So I'm just gonna get to the results. So basically what it states is that I've got 35.7% chance of being NPV positive in this case, should I decide to invest by myself. So here we are. This is basically just a function pulling out of the distribution where the what's the likelihood of hitting a specific threshold. And I did exactly the same thing on this side for a cost benefit analysis for the machine option in the case of a joint venture. So I basically said I'm still having the same likelihood of getting hit myself, but here it's a 3 people joint venture. So basically I'm decreasing my capital cost, assuming that we're doing it evenly. Obviously, there's some secondary risk we'd have to see as an organization if we're doing a joint venture about the risk sharing portion of cost overruns, of getting shut by the competition afterward while we're vulnerable. So we just want to make sure that we're in good partnership. So we still have to do the evaluation of those risks. But here's just on the capital cost, we reduce it, and we see that we do increase our likelihood of success, but not by much, because we're very sensitive of are we getting hit or not by James Bond. So if there's anything that's tells me that it could be a higher likelihood of getting hit by James Bond, especially in the early years, I want to make sure I'm aware of that, because that would have a big impact on the NPV of the proposal. Then the last one is really a little bit silly. Is will the trap even work? There's a lot of way to go about this. Here, the system is simulated to through different layers. So there's the trap layer, which is the hydrofluoric acid pump. So if you recall, we had 10% failure for each of the pumps and 5% failure for the mechanical system. This is simulated here because it's a on-off. It's simulated through a binomial distribution. So will it go on or off when triggered? So I have here two sample of the binomial distribution with a 90% likelihood of success. I've got here one activation with a 95% likelihood of success. So that's the reverse from the 10% failure and 5% mechanical failure. So that here's basically giving the sum of how many of those pumps or gravity system for the HF would work. Once again, you could always wrap all of this through a single cell. It's easy to build all of those in a single cell, but for explainability, I always say you're better to spread things out a little bit, especially when you're the only one knowing about at risk, for example, your solution. So try to make your model as easy as possible for you to explain to people afterward. Layer 2 was the laser, and once again here, the goal was to detect what's the likelihood that the lasers would still be effective and working after the 168-hour I need to bring James Bond in. So that's based on the gamma distribution. So here it is. I've got my gamma distribution, and it says that I've got one's working as intended because this is the number of hours before failure, and here. That's a good thing about working with Excel add-on for Monte Carlo simulation. Basically, what I do is I've got what's the likelihood that cell, so my gamma distribution, will be higher than 168, which is the number of hours I've got to for that. And if yes, you can put the logic basically if C30, so if the distribution is higher than 168, put 1, if not 0. And then my Scorpion shoot is basically a binomial distribution once again with one try at 25% likelihood of success. So this is why the expected value of that distribution is 0. And here's the sum of the various layers. Once I have this, I've simulated it, and this is the likelihood of having 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 layers working per design and potentially killing James Bond. So it's James Bond, so I want to be extra sure, so I want some redundancy. So I could ask myself, what's the likelihood of having at least 4 of the traps working? And this is what we get here. So once again, risk target, D will give you the cumulative likelihood of that working. So I've got 71.76% chance of having at least 4 traps, so 4 or 5 traps working. If it was only 2, I want to make that they work at the same time. I'm at 99.76% chance of success, and it'd be even higher. I could just put this here to say, well, what do I have? Well, I'm 99.99, and I could spread this up a little bit to see by how much. So 99.9938% chance if I only need 1 to work. Is that enough for James Bond? Not necessarily. So that this is where we're going to start working with Bayes' theorem. But at least you see the overall model, how it is structured. And once again, it's good insight. This is a simple one. For example, will the trap even work? We didn't ask ourselves what's the likelihood of common failure. We didn't breaking down too much. We could go down. Each of those traps could be broken down as a system with the likelihood of failure of each component and where are the correlation. So we could have gone in much more details, but at least you get the gist of it. Back to the presentation. As you saw in the demonstration, everything comes together and you integrate all of this through your Monte Carlo simulation. Now let's get back to Bayes' theorem, because we saw application when using distributions. Now we're going to have the discussion. We'll see more about how you apply it mathematically. So back to the formula, and we're going to take an example here. So let's say that we want to understand the likelihood of something happening given another thing happening. Maybe we want to make sure that it's our machine or our bullet, the bullet of our henchman, that killed James Bond, because we want to claim the credits, right? So that's a good thing with the application of Bayes' theorem. It's going to enable you to do that. It's used for forecasting a lot and including new information. I know Nate Silver is using it for forecasting in some occasion for some of his models. So the example we have here, let's say that 10% of houses in the town have their alarm triggered each year. And 0.29% of houses have a burglary each year. And 90% of burglaries trigger the alarm. So that's the information I'm going to have to populate the theorem here. So that would lead to probability that there's a burglary considering that the alarm was triggered is equal to the probability that the alarm is triggered considering there's a burglary. So that's the likelihood that the burglary will trigger the alarm times the probability that there is a burglary divided by the probability that the alarm was triggered. So if I'm plugging in my numbers, I've got 90% times 0.29% divided by 10%. I've got 2.61% likelihood of having a burglary if there's an alarm trigger. Because there's way more false alarm than there are real alarm. And let's see it visually, just so it's easier to understand the logic at the back of this. So let's say I've got 10,000 houses, and I've got 10% of that is 1,000. Wow, I'm good at maths this morning. So I've got 1,000 alarms every year. And I've got 29 burglaries. Some of them, the alarm is triggered. Some of them, the alarm is not triggered. So now I've got that 29 burglary that's from the 0.29% house being burglarized. Sorry about the English. And so basically, if I've got in 90% cases burglary triggers the alarm, I've got 26 burglary with the alarm triggered, and I've got 3 burglary with no alarm triggered. So that's the intuition at the back of it. It's quite powerful because when you start to have complex causes, or you want to understand if there's a lot of false positive or false negative in a specific case, this will help you navigate it. Let's get back to the theorem here. So for bullets for James Bond, the numbers are slightly different, but probability that we have a dead James Bond if he's hit by a bullet is equal by the probability he's hit by a bullet considering there's a dead James Bond. Times the probability that we have a dead James Bond divided by the probability that he's hit by a bullet. So in this line of work, let's say you're 99% sure that he's going to get hit by a bullet at some point. We don't think here, we don't have a lot of faith that this will be the way James Bond will go because it's too boring, I guess, for a filmmaker. So maybe there's only 3% chance that if we have a dead James Bond hit by a bullet, considering we have a dead James Bond, so small likelihood, and we know he's nearly immortal, so very low likelihood of him being killed. So this leads to a very small probability that we have a dead James Bond, considering he's hit by a bullet. Let's get back to the machine now. Same theorem again. So probability that James Bond is that we have a dead James Bond, considering that the machine works, is equal to the probability the machine works, considering that we have a dead James Bond, times the probability that we have a dead James Bond divided that probability that the machine works. And to plug those numbers in, maybe we think that since it's a more entertaining and gruesome death, maybe this is the way he's going to go because of the movie maker. He's still got the same chance of dying, which is very low. And here is what we got from the model that was based on 4 of the components of the trap working. So that we got that from the Monte Carlo simulation. So much higher chance of succeeding, but still very, very low. So obviously, when you're working with Bayes' theorem, the higher number in the top part of the equation will increase the likelihood, while a higher denominator will reduce the likelihood. So overall, the machine looks better to kill him, but it's still a questionable method. Methodology-wise, also various Bayes theorem, you can chain these up, and this is where you get into Bayesian network with probability of X considering Y, and you improve your forecasting power. That's something you can bring to Monte Carlo without any problem. So back to our consultant problem, issue here is that James Bond is very hard to kill, being hard to kill because we don't have much evidence. Even that 0.2% we had to come up with based on what we saw in the movie. So probably need to catch him off guard if we want to get rid of it. So one last problem, it's going to be binomial, it's going to be simple, because in the end, I guess the best thing you can do is basically to nuke James Bond, without him knowing that you're there. So I tried to do what's the likelihood of failure of nuclear weapons. I found out one failure out of 2058 explosions. Obviously, this is something I'd be suspicious about. People are not inclined to tell they're incompetent when they're talking about nuclear weapons, so countries will be not putting too much information about that. There's a theory, a study in the 70s saying that maybe one out of 60 nukes would not work properly, which is remarkable because they're complex system and the trade-off between reliability and safety is quite intense on them. So if you go with, let's say we go with 4 nukes, binomial distribution, what's the likelihood of failure if you got 4 nukes blowing up at the same time on an unaware James Bond? Well, it's a very low likelihood, as you can see, considering that 59 out of 60 should be working. So you take 1 megaton times 4 nukes, a couple of kilometers of fireballs and radiation. It would have very large population and economic impact. It's not very ecological. We need to remember that this year's theme involves sustainability, so we may as well compost James Bond when he's dead. So nuke is probably not the best way for that. So at this point, what we just wait for natural death and then we compost them. I guess that would be the best outcome for us to tackle James Bond. Well, that was a little bit silly, but I hope you saw a few things interesting about updating your model and having the model evolve over time as you get more data. So the highlights, I guess, would be that. Build your models so you can gradually add new information to improve them and to prevent model decay, because models do decay over time. Remember that Bayesian statistics are very powerful and they have a lot of real life applications. So it's something that's worth digging into, and most risk practitioners are not going into that sort of techniques. As well for James Bond, maybe another final way to get rid of him would be to throw a rather intelligent octopus his way. So 008, which is James Bond replacement, could maybe pick over from him. After 50 years of waiting, he might be slightly eager to take over from James Bond, but he might not be as spry as desired for the job. Thanks for listening. And once again, thanks, Alex, for hosting this super event for the third time now. I hope listener picked up a few tricks. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to keep the dialogue going. Be careful if you're going into the supervillain consultant business. It's a tricky business, and stay healthy. James Bond, allow me to introduce myself. Okay, that's over the top. I need to cut that out.